grandparents immigrated from what is now called the Ukraine, but at the time they left was part of Russia. They lived in a town called Nikolaev, which is the town where my grandmother was raised, and my grandfather was raised in a town called Zlotopol, which is spelled Zlotopol, but he had a retail business with his father in Nikolaev, and that's how he met my grandmother. At the time, it was at the time when the Tsars ruled Russia, and the Communist Party was taking over in the early 1900s, and they were killing the Jews. They were sending soldiers to shoot Jews. And my grandfather realized, being Jewish, that it was a good idea to get out of town. Soldier came riding through town, and he was waving a gun and yelling that he wanted to kill Jews. My grandfather, realizing what was happening, and it was in his store, which was in the town, and he had a worker who was not Jewish. And he said to the worker, "How much money do you have?" And the worker said, "I don't have much money, just what's in my pocket." And my grandfather said, "Give me the money in your pocket, and you can have the business." In other words, he sold him the business. And when the soldier came to confront my grandfather, the worker, who was now, quote-unquote, the owner of the business, said, "Leave the Jew alone." And the soldier said, "Who are you?" And the worker said, "I own this business." And the soldier got nervous because the owner of a business would be an important man, and he was not Jewish, so he must have been important. So he rode away. My grandfather went home and said to my grandmother, "Grab what you can take and tell the boys to grab what they can take," and they left. The trip itself on the boat, I don't know, but I can guarantee you they did not have great accommodations because they didn't have a lot of money. They only had what they had taken with them. However, when they got to Ellis Island, remember they came from Russia where people didn't have a lot of identification. They got to Ellis Island, and my grandfather presented himself at Ellis Island and gave his name, and the officer at Ellis Island says, "Who can vouch that you are who you say you are?" And he pointed to his oldest son and said, "This is my son, he knows who I am." So they each vouched for one another right down the line. And that's how they all went through Ellis Island. And because the baby was by then already starting to not do so well, was sickly, she kept him in her coat so the officer would not see him and see that he looked sickly. Because in those days at Ellis Island, if you didn't look healthy, they would tell you to go back on the boat. He worked at odd jobs, but he decided he didn't like New York for whatever reason. And they went from New York up to Fall River, Massachusetts. The main thing he did to earn a living when they got to Massachusetts was the push cart, the merchandise. In fact, he did first in Fall River. And then when he realized Fall River was a small town and he couldn't do that much business, he rented a garage in Boston and got the push cart up to Boston, and he would go to Boston every morning, get out the push cart, put merchandise on it, and travel, walk around with the push cart in Boston selling merchandise. And when he had saved enough money, he opened up the retail store in Fall River. He had 3 retail stores until 1927. The Great Depression came in Boston in